the fact that this works as a duo, but I worry, Charlotte, whether you're going to hold him back.
We've come on here as a duo, and we're going to stay here as a duo.
They were just two teens from Essex, shy, unlikely stars.
To affect someone in some way, I feel that I realise that all over again. I realise the power that music and that art has. It's a pretty wonderful thing.
Until one performance on Britain's Got Talent changed everything. But behind the standing ovations, record deals, and viral fame, a more complex story was unfolding. Why did they really split? What happened after the cameras stopped rolling? And could a reunion still be possible? They walked onto the stage as two relatively unknown teenagers, Jonathan Antoine and Charlotte Giaconelli, both a little nervous, both uncertain of what the future might hold. But when their voices came together during that first audition on Britain's Got Talent in 2012, something clicked. It wasn't just the song, or the surprise on the judges' faces, or even the standing ovation that followed. It was the chemistry, the unspoken musical understanding that seemed to exist between two people who hadn't even considered forming a duo until not long before. But to truly understand how that moment came to be, you have to go back to where it all began, not on television, but in a secondary school in Essex. Jonathan and Charlotte were students at West Hatch High School in Chigwell. They were both passionate about music, but had never sung together until one of their music teachers, Jeanette Brown, had an idea that would change everything. According to multiple interviews with the pair over the years, it was Jeanette's wedding that brought them together. Wanting to involve her students in the ceremony, she asked Jonathan and Charlotte to sing a duet. The chosen song was The Prayer, originally performed by Andrea Bocelli and Celine Dion, a challenging piece that demands technical skill, emotional depth, and a sense of harmony between singers. It was no small ask for two teenagers who had never performed as a duo before. But the moment they sang, something stood out. Jonathan, with his powerful operatic tenor voice, and Charlotte, with her clear and expressive soprano, blended in a way that surprised not only their teacher, but the students themselves. The contrast in their styles didn't clash, it complemented. The performance made such an impact that Jeanette Brown later reflected on that day as something she felt genuinely privileged to have witnessed. She had asked them to sing simply because she believed in their potential, but even she hadn't expected it to work quite so well. After that event, Jonathan and Charlotte began exploring their musical chemistry more seriously. With the support of their music teacher and their vocal coach, Jenny Ewington, they started rehearsing together regularly. What had begun as a one-off school performance turned into a developing partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and a shared love for singing. And when Britain's Got Talent came around, they decided to audition as a duo. At this point, Jonathan was 17 years old and Charlotte was just 16. They chose The Prayer for their audition, the same song that had brought them together. But before they had even sung a single note, the camera caught an exchange between the judges and the hosts. Simon Cowell, known for his critical eye and sometimes harsh honesty, appeared skeptical about their pairing. That skepticism became even more apparent after their performance. While the audience and most of the judges were deeply impressed, Simon offered advice that would turn into one of the most talked about moments of that season. He suggested that Jonathan consider going solo. In his view, Jonathan had the kind of rare operatic voice that could stand alone, while Charlotte, though talented, might hold him back. It was a blunt comment, especially in front of millions of viewers and in the presence of a partner who had shared the stage just moments earlier. But Jonathan didn't flinch. He responded clearly and firmly. He wouldn't continue without Charlotte. The way he saw it, they had come into the audition as a team, and they would carry on as a team. That moment, broadcast live to the nation, was more than just a young man standing up for his friend. It was a declaration of loyalty, of belief in collaboration, and of confidence in their combined talent. In later interviews, Jonathan explained that Simon's on-camera persona often differed from how he was behind the scenes. He said that off-stage, Simon was more supportive, even warm, something that's not always obvious in the sharp critiques he gives during filming. Cowell himself later admitted he may have been wrong to suggest they split, acknowledging that Charlotte's voice added something unique to their performances. Over time, even he came to appreciate their dynamic. Their story was compelling, not just because of their voices, but because of their friendship. There were plenty of rumors and questions after their audition aired. Some speculated whether there might be a romantic connection between the two. But Jonathan shut down that narrative very clearly in later conversations, calling such rumors creepy. He said Charlotte was like a sister to him, and their relationship was strictly platonic. For both of them, the focus was always the music. The audition performance, despite the controversy, became one of the most memorable in Britain's Got Talent history. It didn't just launch them into the public eye, it defined them early on as artists who valued connection and integrity. Many viewers were moved not only by their voices, but by the story unfolding behind them. In a competitive reality show where people often look out for themselves, Jonathan and Charlotte's decision to stand by each other stood out. From that moment, their popularity surged. Their performance on YouTube gathered millions of views, and discussions about their potential filled online forums and entertainment segments across the UK and beyond. But while it may have seemed like an overnight success, it was built on years of individual practice, patience, and a bit of luck. A teacher's intuition, and a wedding performance that nobody expected to lead anywhere. As their time on the show continued, they faced more challenges, both technical and emotional. But they consistently met expectations and often exceeded them. Each week, they returned to the stage with new pieces, refining their act and showing range, maturity, and poise that went far beyond their age. Still, the shadow of Cowell's initial comment lingered in public memory. Some fans and critics continued to wonder if Jonathan would have been better off as a solo artist. But week after week, the two proved that their voices, though different in tone and style, worked in tandem in a way that made each performance stronger. They weren't trying to be the next big pop act or opera star. They were simply presenting the music they loved, in the way that felt most authentic to them. This authenticity is what drew people in. It wasn't just about hitting the right notes or delivering powerful crescendos. It was about the emotion behind the performances. Viewers could see that these were two teenagers who genuinely cared for one another, respected each other's talents, and were navigating this whirlwind together. It made their journey relatable, even for people who didn't typically follow classical or theatrical music. Their rise wasn't built on flashy gimmicks or reality TV drama. It was grounded in the honesty of their performances and the clarity of their bond. And though they were still at the very beginning of their public careers, it was already clear that Jonathan and Charlotte had managed to carve out a space that felt sincere, even in the fast-moving world of televised talent shows. With every round of the competition, Jonathan and Charlotte demonstrated not just vocal strength, but consistency and growth. One of the most notable moments in their journey came during the semi-finals, where they performed Caruso, an Italian ballad by Lucio Dalla. The piece was bold and vocally demanding, showcasing Jonathan's rich tenor range while allowing Charlotte's theatrical soprano to add warmth and contrast. Their performance earned strong reactions from both the audience and the judges. Amanda Holden called it amazing, while even Simon Cowell, who had previously advised them to separate, admitted that they had made the right decision by staying together. This moment marked a shift. Cowell's acknowledgement of their partnership wasn't just an about-turn in opinion. It was a validation of everything the duo had stood for since the beginning. They hadn't chosen the easy path. They hadn't given in to pressure. Instead, they had stuck to what felt right for them. And now, it was paying off, not just in approval, but in artistic growth. Their voices were becoming more polished, their confidence was growing, and their ability to command the stage was hard to ignore. Winning the public vote during the semi-finals earned them a direct place in the finals. It was a significant milestone, but also a moment of reflection. Despite the intense competition, Jonathan and Charlotte continued to approach each performance with humility. They weren't interested in showmanship for its own sake. Their focus remained on the music and on staying true to themselves. In the final round, they chose to perform The Prayer once again, the same song that had introduced them to the world during their audition. It was a full-circle moment, but it didn't feel repetitive. This time, their voices carried more assurance. Their stage presence had matured. The delivery was more refined, and their bond on stage was clearer than ever. The decision to return to the song that had first brought them recognition was not only strategic, but deeply symbolic. It reminded viewers of how far they had come in just a few short weeks. David Walliams described their final performance as sensational, while Simon Cowell, now fully on board with their partnership, called it unbelievable. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause, and for many watching at home, it felt like Jonathan and Charlotte were the clear winners. However, the final results didn't reflect that. The top prize went to Ashley and Pudsey, a dancing dog act that had also won over the public with its charm and originality. Jonathan and Charlotte finished in second place. Despite not winning the competition, their journey was far from over. In fact, for many fans and observers, their second-place finish didn't feel like a loss at all. They had achieved something arguably more lasting. They had earned the respect of the judges, the admiration of a national audience, and the attention of the music industry. Their story, one of loyalty, talent, and determination, had become one of the defining arcs of the season. Shortly after the finale, it was announced that Jonathan and Charlotte had signed a $1 million record deal with Syco Music, Simon Cowell's own label. It was a major vote of confidence and a significant step forward for the young duo. The deal signified that their appeal wasn't limited to reality TV, that there was genuine interest in what they could offer as recording artists. In September 2012, just a few months after the end of the show, they released their debut album, Together. Produced by Graham Stack, known for his work with classical crossover artists like G4, the album included a mix of original songs and covers, many of which were chosen to highlight the pair's distinctive blend of classical and contemporary styles. Naturally, The Prayer was among the tracks, anchoring the album in the song that had come to define their early career. Together debuted at number 5 on the UK Albums Chart, an impressive achievement for two performers who had only recently left secondary school. The critical response was largely positive, with many praising the emotional maturity of the performances, especially given their young age. The album helped establish them as serious artists, not just former talent show contestants. It also introduced their voices to an international audience, with a US release following shortly after the UK launch. Riding the momentum of their debut, Jonathan and Charlotte released a second album, Perhaps Love, in October 2013. While it still featured duets and classical crossover arrangements, this album also included more solo pieces. These individual tracks hinted at a growing awareness of their personal musical identities. Jonathan's pieces leaned more heavily into operatic and classical material, while Charlotte's songs explored musical theater and lighter vocal styles. It was clear that while their partnership remained strong, their artistic paths were beginning to show signs of divergence. Still, the album was a success. Perhaps Love also reached number 5 on the UK Albums Chart, reaffirming their commercial appeal and fan base. Their blend of operatic drama and pop accessibility continued to resonate with a broad audience. Critics noted that the album felt more mature and more ambitious than their debut, and it positioned them not just as a novelty act, but as young performers capable of growth and reinvention. Beyond the studio, Jonathan and Charlotte also embarked on live performances and toured venues across the UK. These shows gave fans the chance to experience their music outside the format of a talent show, and for the duo, it offered another opportunity to refine their stage presence and connect with audiences on a more personal level. It was clear that they were no longer just students or television contestants. They were professional artists now, navigating a career that was still in its early stages, but full of possibility. Their success during this period stood on more than just their musical abilities. What continued to draw people to Jonathan and Charlotte was the authenticity of their story. They weren't manufactured or heavily marketed. Their partnership had been formed through a school assignment, not a record label strategy. They had faced criticism on a public stage, stood by each other, and gone on to prove that their commitment wasn't just sentimental. it was artistically sound. At a time when many reality show acts fade quickly after the cameras stop rolling, Jonathan and Charlotte stood out for their staying power. They weren't chasing celebrity for its own sake. They were focused on their craft, their voices, and their shared belief in what music could do. That grounded approach earned them not only chart success, but a loyal following. But even as they reached these new heights, questions began to emerge about what might come next. Their individual musical preferences were starting to surface more clearly, and fans and industry insiders alike began to wonder whether their future would continue as a duo, or whether at some point their paths would naturally diverge. It started with a conversation, one that would mark a significant turning point in their partnership. When they sat down with Sony Classical to plan their third album, Jonathan and Charlotte found themselves at odds for the first time. According to Charlotte, in a later interview with the Evening Standard, they couldn't agree on a single song for the track list. What had previously felt effortless was now complicated. The differences between their musical preferences, which had always been present, were now more pronounced. Jonathan had always leaned toward classical opera, a genre that suited his deep tenor voice and allowed him to explore traditional vocal works with power and precision. Charlotte, on the other hand, was increasingly drawn to musical theater and contemporary vocal styles, genres that aligned with her training and personal taste. As they tried to find common ground, it became clear that the same partnership that had once brought them together was now making it harder for either of them to fully express themselves creatively. Sony, seeing the tension and understanding the natural evolution of both artists, proposed a new approach. Instead of releasing another album as a duo, they were each offered individual record deals. The idea was not about ending a partnership in conflict, but rather about giving both Jonathan and Charlotte the freedom to pursue their individual passions. Still, for Charlotte, the suggestion came as a surprise. She admitted in an interview that it felt like a spanner in the works. For years, Jonathan had been part of everything she did musically. The thought of performing without him felt unfamiliar and uncertain. But after some time to reflect, about a month, as Charlotte later said, they came to a mutual understanding. They weren't breaking up in anger or disappointment. There were no harsh words, no tabloid scandals, and no personal grievances. The decision was rooted in artistic growth and the recognition that their careers were evolving in different directions. They had started this journey together, but it was now time to explore what they could achieve on their own. Charlotte described the split as emotional but necessary. She spoke candidly about the strange mix of sadness and excitement that came with the change. On one hand, she was stepping into new creative opportunities. On the other, she was leaving behind a working relationship that had defined her career from the very beginning. It was more than just a musical change. It was a personal shift. The duo had shared some of the most formative years of their lives. Letting go of that partnership, even on good terms, wasn't easy. Jonathan, for his part, echoed similar sentiments. He acknowledged the role Charlotte had played in his early success and spoke of their time together with respect and appreciation. Neither of them framed the decision as a failure. Instead, they viewed it as a natural progression, a way for each of them to continue growing without being creatively limited by the structure of a duo. While fans were supportive, the news still raised questions. Could they find the same level of success individually? Would their careers maintain the same momentum now that they were no longer performing together? And perhaps most importantly, what would happen to the close friendship they had once shared? That last question was partially answered in 2017, during Jonathan's appearance on ITV's Lorraine. When asked if he and Charlotte were still in touch, his response was honest. "We don't really get to speak very often, but that's the nature of it." He went on to explain that his schedule had become increasingly demanding, with constant travel and rehearsals. He wasn't seeing many people outside of his immediate family, who often accompanied him on tour and served as his core support system. There was no bitterness in his words, just a quiet recognition that life had moved on. The realities of professional life in the music industry, especially as a solo artist, meant that staying in close contact wasn't always possible. For some fans, It was a little disappointing to hear that the once inseparable pair had drifted apart. But for others, it was simply understandable. Friendships change. People grow up and careers take them in different directions. Even so, neither Jonathan nor Charlotte ever spoke poorly of each other. In fact, they continued to speak about each other with genuine respect. Charlotte credited Jonathan as being an essential part of their success on Britain's Got Talent, saying in interviews that she wouldn't have made it through the experience without him. Jonathan, likewise, often reflected on their achievements together as some of the most meaningful of his early career. Their decision to separate professionally hadn't been driven by drama. It was a rare example of two performers making a thoughtful, honest choice about their futures without resorting to public disputes or finger-pointing. In an industry where partnerships often end messily, theirs was a quiet and respectful parting. Still, the emotional weight of the split was real. For Charlotte, stepping onto the stage alone for the first time felt scarier than sad. It wasn't just about singing on her own. It was about moving forward without someone who had been by her side since the beginning. For Jonathan, the change meant embracing the full weight of a solo career. It was both freeing and demanding. He was no longer part of a duo, but now had to carry every performance and decision on his own. In interviews, he acknowledged the challenges that came with that shift, but also expressed excitement about the opportunities to define his career more clearly. Over time, both artists began to establish themselves in their own right. Charlotte delved into musical theater, securing roles that showcased her range as both a vocalist and an actress. Jonathan focused more deeply on classical crossover, recording albums that highlighted his operatic strength and emotional delivery. Though their styles were different, both found paths that allowed them to grow artistically. Looking back, their split wasn't just the end of a musical partnership, it was a moment of transition. They had gone from being teenagers in a school music class to national stars. Along the way, they had faced public scrutiny, industry pressure, and personal uncertainty, and they had done it together. But as they matured, both personally and professionally, the decision to go solo became a step not away from each other, but toward themselves. In the years since, the bond they once shared on stage has remained a powerful part of their story, even if it's no longer part of their daily lives. The performances they gave as a duo still circulate online, still move audiences, and still serve as a reminder of what they created together. For fans, those moments continue to hold meaning, not just because of the music, but because of the honesty and heart that went into every note. Charlotte turned her attention to musical theater, a world that had always appealed to her. Before her rise to fame on Britain's Got Talent, she had already been training in the genre, having studied at the arts educational schools in London. That foundation gave her a strong starting point as she transitioned from recording artist to stage performer. It didn't take long for her to begin making her mark. One of her early appearances came in Carousel in Concert at the Royal Festival Hall, where she performed alongside an established cast in a show that allowed her to blend her classical background with theatrical storytelling. Her move into musical theater continued with more roles, including one in the original UK cast of Heathers the Musical, a high-energy production with a devoted following. Charlotte played Martha Dunstock, a character whose journey required both emotional vulnerability and vocal skill. Her performance was praised not just for its technical quality, but for its sincerity and dramatic depth. This role in particular allowed Charlotte to show that she wasn't just a singer who could act, she was a performer with range, timing, and presence. She also appeared in Into the Woods at the Theatre Royal Bath, taking on the role of Florinda. While a smaller part compared to some of her earlier work, it showed her willingness to take on varied roles and expand her repertoire. These performances helped her build a strong reputation in the UK theatre scene, where she became known for her expressive voice and emotional honesty. Away from the stage, Charlotte began to connect with a new generation of fans through social media. On platforms like Instagram and TikTok, she gave followers a glimpse behind the curtain, sharing rehearsal clips, personal updates, and candid reflections on life in the arts. She mixed humor with sincerity, and over time her online presence became as important to her audience as her stage work. She talked openly about the realities of performing, including the mental health challenges that can come with a demanding creative career. In doing so, she positioned herself not just as a performer, but as someone using her platform to advocate for others. In 2022, during Pride Month, Charlotte publicly came out as bisexual. She marked the occasion with a post on Instagram that showed her wrapped in a rainbow flag. The post was met with widespread support, both from fans and fellow performers. For Charlotte, the announcement was not only a personal milestone, but a meaningful moment of visibility, particularly for someone who had grown up in the public eye. She later reflected on how important it was for her to live authentically, and how freeing it felt to share that part of herself with the world. Meanwhile, Jonathan had taken a different route. After their split, he stayed focused on classical crossover and opera, genres where his voice had always felt most at home. He signed with Sony Classical and released his debut solo album Tenore later in 2014. The album, which featured a mix of operatic arias and traditional pieces, debuted at #1 on the UK Classical Artist Albums chart. It was a clear message that Jonathan could stand on his own as a soloist, and that the public's support for him hadn't faded. His follow-up album, Believe, came in 2016. This second release expanded on the themes of the first, blending Italian classics with powerful orchestral arrangements and emotional interpretations. The critical response was positive, with reviewers praising Jonathan's vocal control, maturity, and ability to bring emotion into each performance. With each release, he continued to grow, not just as a singer, but as a storyteller through music. Over the years, Jonathan also began touring internationally, performing in the United States and Canada, and reaching new audiences beyond the UK. His concerts often mixed the grandeur of classical music with accessible touches from musical theater and popular ballads. In a series of performances titled Beyond the Curtain, Jonathan blended traditional operatic works with show tunes and even a few Disney favorites, revealing a more playful and theatrical side of his personality. He also collaborated with legendary songwriter Diane Warren for an album titled By Request, the Diane Warren Songbook, Volume 1. The project gave him a chance to bridge the gap between classical singing and contemporary balladry. It was a sign that Jonathan wasn't afraid to experiment and stretch the boundaries of genre. In addition to his musical evolution, Jonathan underwent a visible personal transformation as well. Over the course of several years, he lost over 5 stone, more than 70 pounds. This journey, which he discussed openly in interviews and on social media, was not about image or industry expectations. Jonathan explained that the decision to change his lifestyle came from a desire to feel better physically and mentally. He described how, for a long time, he felt like life was happening to him, and how deciding to take control was one of the most powerful choices he had made. He began incorporating light exercise into his routine, adjusted his approach to food, and started prioritizing self-care. The change wasn't rapid or dramatic. It was gradual and grounded in sustainability. He told fans that he still had a way to go, but that he felt stronger and more present than he had in years. His transparency and openness about the emotional side of this transformation resonated with many people, especially those who had followed his journey since his teenage years. Through all of these changes, Jonathan maintained a close connection with his fans. He regularly posted heartfelt messages thanking them for their support, not just for his music, but for allowing him the space to grow into who he was becoming. Whether through album releases, concert updates, or simply checking in online, he showed that the bond between artist and audience could be both deep and lasting. As for the possibility of a reunion between Jonathan and Charlotte, it remains an open question. Neither has ruled it out entirely. Over the years, both have spoken with fondness about the time they shared and the work they created. While nothing official has been announced, the idea of a future performance together is one that continues to excite fans. Their shared history, mutual respect, and the magic of their early work make the possibility of a reunion appealing, even if only for a one-off performance. In the meantime, both continue to flourish in their own worlds. Charlotte has built a strong career in theater, earning recognition for her acting as well as her voice. Her online presence has allowed her to expand her audience beyond traditional stagegoers. Jonathan has become a leading figure in the classical crossover scene, performing for international audiences and continuing to challenge the boundaries of his genre. Both artists have proven that their talent wasn't just a product of a moment in the spotlight, but the beginning of enduring careers. Their time as a duo may be behind them, but the legacy they built together continues to inspire. For many fans, their story remains one of connection, growth, and the power of music to bring people together, even if those people eventually take different paths. Whether performing side by side or in separate venues, Jonathan and Charlotte have each found their voice. And while the spotlight may have shifted over the years, it's clear that both are still shining, each in their own unique way.